Y'all, just 3 days after Moscow Mitch was found unresponsive and in possible cardiac arrest, his wife left him and went to China. Y'all go ahead and grab your tea and have a seat. May this type of love never, and I mean never, ever, 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 find me. So as we all know, honey, on June 14th, Moscow Mitch was found unresponsive and in possible cardiac arrest in his home. Now, he hasn't been seen ever since. And of course, Annalise Keaton's internet is definitely interneting on this, and people are speculating that Moscow Mitch may no longer be with us. However, his staff says that he's recovering and that he is staying on top of things when it comes down to, Congress or whatnot. Now, if it was me and my husband was in that precarious situation, I would want to be by his side. I mean, Moscow Mitch is 84 years old, and we all know he isn't in the best health condition. But baby, that is not the case with between Moscow Mitch and his wife, honey, because just 3 days, you see the date here, she was off over there in Beijing meeting with the Chinese vice president. I declare, honey, what a disgrace. Just 3 days after, honey, she was gone. Now, y'all know that she was Freppado's transportation secretary, but just a few days after January 6th, she went ahead and quit that job, and we really hadn't seen much of her since. But here she is out there in Beijing having a...
What's up, family? So we got to talk about Mitch McConnell because right now there's real confusion about what's going on with this man. I don't think the full picture is being laid out clear for you. And here's what we know, plain and simple. He's 84 years old. On June 14th, he was found unresponsive at his home in D.C. Possible cardiac arrest. That's not a rumor. That's a fact. Now, here's the part that's going to get you sitting up. 3 days later, his wife is on a plane to Beijing with Chinese officials. And we're going to break down what the dispatch audio actually says, what this August 3rd rumor really means, and why the timing of all of this matters. Hit the like button, drop a comment, subscribe, and let's get into it.
And now to questions surrounding the health of Senator Mitch McConnell. According to dispatch audio reviewed by ABC News, emergency medical personnel were dispatched to his home last month to attend to an unconscious person who appeared to be in cardiac arrest. ABC's Olivia Rubin has more.
It's been more than 2 weeks since Senator Mitch McConnell's team announced the 84-year-old senator had been hospitalized without ever saying why. Now, this EMS dispatch audio reviewed by ABC News possibly shedding new light. At 8:36 a.m. that day, you can hear a dispatcher direct a response to the senator's address in Washington, D.C. for a, quote, unconscious person.
Medical local paramedic agent 3, medic 3, ALS response, unconscious.
That phrase, ALS response, standing for advanced life support. 6 minutes later, an EMS responder telling the dispatcher CPR is, quote, in progress.
Three communications. East Army supervisor, CPR in progress.
And less than 1 minute later, the dispatcher repeating McConnell's address and saying to, quote, respond for cardiac arrest.
EMS 2 response for cardiac arrest.
McConnell is not named directly in any of the audio. On June 22nd, McConnell's office indicated he was still working on Senate business, but would not appear on Capitol Hill for votes. He was last seen on the Hill on June 11th. It's the latest in a series of health incidents for McConnell, now the third oldest senator in Congress. He's set to retire at the end of his term in January. And a spokesperson for McConnell declined to comment on this audio and didn't provide any updates on his condition. They have remained tight-lipped on the senator's health, and now 18 days later, it's still not clear if the sitting senator remains hospitalized or has been released.
Desiree Townsend here again at Capitol Hill to address these rumors I've been seeing spreading all across social media about this August 3rd date, some sort of drop-dead date for Mitch McConnell and his Senate seat. That if Senator McConnell were to die on or after August 3rd, it would be somehow too late for Kentucky to announce a special election, meaning that his Senate seat would essentially remain vacant until the new Congress is sworn in on January 3rd. So in addition to being a correspondent here at Capitol Hill, I also work in litigation, and I read the Kentucky law that changed the vacancy procedures for the Senate, and I cannot find a single clause or section in the statute to substantiate this August 3rd claim. In 2024, Kentucky passed House Bill 622, overriding Governor Andy Beshear's veto. This law repealed the governor's authority to appoint a replacement U.S. senator and instead requires that a Senate vacancy be filled through a special election, with that winner serving the remainder of the unexpired term in the Senate. So I looked into anything in the statute that could potentially create an August 3rd deadline, and I couldn't find a single section in the entire statute or in any other applicable election laws in Kentucky. So based upon House Bill 622, the law requires the governor to issue a proclamation for a special election. It requires county sheriffs to receive that proclamation at least 56 days before the election and requires candidate petitions for the special election to be filed, at least 49 days before the election. Based on the way the law is written, presumably you could potentially have a special election really up until 56 days before the new 120th Congress is sworn in on January 3rd. That date would actually be November 9th. Now, there are legitimate election deadlines in August, but none of those would get us back anywhere near to this August 3rd date or to a special election. So if there's anyone out there that actually has a statute or clause to point to in Kentucky, I'm happy to review it. But as of right now, this August 3rd date to me is utter legal nonsense.
So let's start with June 14th, because this is where everything begins. As you guys saw, EMS gets dispatched to McConnell's home, and according to dispatch audio that ABC News actually got their hands on, the call comes in for an unconscious person. 6 minutes later, you hear a responder say CPR is in progress. Less than a minute after that, dispatch comes back on and says respond for cardiac arrest. And I want you to sit with that for a second. Unconscious, then CPR in progress, then cardiac arrest, all within about 7 minutes. Now, to be fair, McConnell isn't named directly anywhere in that audio. I want to be honest with you about that because I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to lay out what's known and what isn't. But the address on that call matches his home in DC, and ABC News confirmed that themselves. So when you put those two together, the timing, the address, it's hard to look at that and say this is about somebody else. Here's where it gets messier. He was last seen on the Hill June 11th. Then June 22nd rolls around and his office puts out word that he's still working on Senate business, just won't be showing up for votes. Now think about that. Think about that in plain terms. A sitting United States senator, one of the most powerful men in Washington for years, and the update from his own office is basically he's working, just don't expect to see him. No details on the hospital, no details on what actually happened that morning. Just he's fine, he's working. And here's the plain fact that nobody wants to sit with. 18 days pass, and there's still no clear word on whether this man is even still in the hospital or if he's been released. 18 days. Family, when's the last time you went 18 days without knowing if a family member was still admitted? That's not normal. That's not how you treat the public when you're a public servant. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because while all of this is happening, while the man himself is dealing with what sounds like a cardiac emergency, his wife, Elaine Chao, is photographed in Beijing 3 days after that hospital call, meeting with the Chinese Vice President Han Xing 3 days later. Right? So I want you to really think about that. Within 3 days, and his wife is in China, meeting with the China Vice President. So if your husband, I want you to think about this from a real life place. If your husband, if your wife got rushed to the hospital, unconscious, cardiac arrest on the table, where would you be sitting? You'll be sitting in that waiting room. You'll be sitting by that bed. You will not be boarding a flight to another country to shake hands with foreign officials. That's not a partisan take, family. That's just how people who love each other act when something like this happens. Now, to be fair, I got to give you the other side of it too. McConnell's staff says he's recovering, says he's staying on top of Senate business. That's the official line. I'm not going to sit here and act like that's not what they're saying, but saying somebody is recovering and staying on top of things while refusing to say if he's even still in a hospital, that's not transparency, family. That's a script. And scripts don't answer the question everybody's actually asking, which is simple. Where is he? And is he okay? Because I don't understand how 3 days right? 3 days later, your wife, right? That just mind blowing to me. 3 days after the hospital. So let's be real for a second, family, because what happened in Beijing didn't come out of nowhere. This isn't the first time Elaine Chao's name has been tied to China. And if you don't know her background, let me lay it out plain. She served as transportation secretary. She quit that job just days after January 6th. And she's been married to Mitch McConnell since 1993, before I was even born. I was born in 1999. So we're talking about over 30 years connected to one of the most powerful men in the Senate. And that's not a side character in this story. That's somebody who's been in the room for decades. Now, here's the piece that a lot of people don't sit with long enough. Her family runs a shipping company called Foremost Group. And that company does a lot of business in China. And I'm not about to walk you through spreadsheets or numbers, family. That's not what this is about. The plain fact is simple. Her family has ties, real ties to doing business with China. That's not an opinion. That's just who they are. And this isn't new either. Back in 2017, there was reported that State Department officials raised ethics concerns before one of her trips to Beijing. The concern was about whether her father and her sister might end up sitting in on meetings with Chinese government officials. Think about that for a second. Officials inside our own government looked at that situation and said, wait, hold on. This might be a problem. A lot of people would say this is treason. And that's not something I'm not making up, okay, in regards of the incident. That's not something that's something that was raised back then. We're talking 2017. I'm not making this up. So let's use an everyday example because this is where common sense comes in. Say your family runs a business and that business needed a favor from a foreign government to keep growing. And say your husband or your wife happen to hold a powerful position in the U.S. government at the same time. You don't think people will start asking questions? Of course they would. That's not a conspiracy, family. That's just how people think when money and power and family all sit in the same room all together. And this is where it doesn't add up for a lot of people. This isn't some woman who decided to take a random vacation to China. This is somebody with a track record, a real history of ties to China, going back years, showing up again at the exact moment her husband is dealing with what looks like a serious health scare. If this was a one-time trip, maybe you give it the benefit of the doubt. But when you put the history next to the time, and it starts to look like a pattern, not a coincidence. But here's the thing. People aren't just reacting to one flight to Beijing. They're reacting to a woman who has spent years connected to Chinese business interests, married to a man who has a major influence over U.S. policy, Mitch McConnell, choosing that exact moment right after a cardiac emergency to be overseas shaking hands with a Chinese vice president. That's the part that doesn't sit right. Not the China trip by itself, the China trip at the moment on top of everything we already know about her family's ties. That's what got people asking real questions. And honestly, family, I don't blame them one bit.
Reporting from the New York Times is taking a look at Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao's connections to China through her family's business. Chao's family runs the U.S.-based Foremost Group, a shipping company with a large presence in China. While Secretary Chao has no formal affiliation with her family's business, the Times notes that she has used her profile to help it. The Times also notes the Foremost Group has benefited from, quote, expansive industrial policies in Beijing that are at the heart of diplomatic tensions with the United States. Eric Lipton is one of the authors of that piece. He's an investigative reporter for the New York Times and joins me now from Washington. Eric, thanks for being with us. This is such a deeply reported piece. First of all, you write about requests from Secretary Chao raising ethics questions with American officials in Beijing ahead of an October 2017 visit. What were some of their concerns?
What the situation was is that Elaine Chao was planning to go to Beijing, and her staff had communicated with State Department officials who were in charge of actually arranging the meetings with the top government officials in China. And in those conversations, they were discussing the possibility of having perhaps her sister, Angela Chao, or perhaps her father, James Chao. Angela Chao is the head executive at Foremost Group. James Chao founded the company and until 2018 was its top executive. And there was discussions of having them participate in some of the meetings with the Chinese government officials. This is at the same time that Foremost Group has, 10 ships on order in Shanghai and had a $300 million commitment from the government of China to help finance the construction of some of those ships. So, her family participating in meetings with Chinese government officials could help boost their standing with the Chinese government as it continues to do business in China. And the shipyard in Shanghai, where these 10 ships are being built for the the Chao family is government-owned facility, so it's a massive, government-subsidized facility there in Shanghai.
Well, 2017 was not the first time Chao's family connections to China raised concerns. What more can you tell us about that?
Dating back a couple of decades, Elaine Chao has, and through her family, frequently visited China and helped them launch the introduction of a number of the ships that the company has built. It's built more ships in China than anywhere else. Again, to some extent, not surprising because China is one of the biggest shipbuilding nations in the world. But Elaine Chao, she had served in the cabinet of the labor secretary in the prior Bush administration. And at one point, she brought her father to a meeting, James Chao, when he was an executive at Foremost Group, to a meeting with Chinese government officials associated with the Olympics. And so that showed up in the State Department cables that were released that we saw. And again, he is the top executive at a company that has business in China. She was then in the cabinet of the United States, and she has her father present with her in a company that does business with the state of, the government of China. So it's raised some questions about, if your family member wants to get access to a top level official in China, it would be beneficial if you're a member of the cabinet in the United States.
And context is so significant.
Well, there you have it, family. That speaks for itself, right? Common sense. Also, she was cooperating or worked with or interacted with George Bush, the president. And I disapprove of the actions of Bush and Clinton because I feel like they sold off America. And I don't mean literally like put the United States on Facebook Marketplace and sold it. I'm talking about like during the time, a lot of decisions were made that it made America more dependent on other countries and big corporations. Like jobs kept leaving America because of the Bush and Clinton administrations and going overseas because companies could make products cheaper in places like China. So it makes sense for Elaine Childs, Mitch McConnell's wife, to basically be propped up with her family businesses over there in China with a government-owned facility in China, right? Because at the same time, America was borrowing more money, especially because of wars, tax cuts, and government spending. So it looked like there was a lot of cash flow. And you would think, oh, during the Bush administration and Clinton administration, oh, things were booming. Yeah, but American workers were losing factory jobs, and regular people felt like the country was being run more for Wall Street and big business than for Main Street family. So when you look at that, America's strength used to be that we made things here in the United States, which our current president is trying to bring back. Things were built here. We took care of our own workers, but jobs leave, factories leave. We seen the auto manufacturing business. We seen, for example, where Hyundai and other car manufacturers, big manufacturers that were down in Detroit, which was like the main hub, like in Michigan, Detroit, for the auto manufacturing business, like Chrysler and Stellantis. They were all going to Mexico for cheaper labor costs and to pay cheaper workers while still selling cars here in the United States. But American workers was losing jobs, in which, thanks in the name of tariffs, they end up bringing their behind back here because they thought they were going to sell here, eat their cake and eat it too, and then get cheap workers and go over there to Mexico and basically rob America and benefit off of our marketplace. Because as the United States, we control the global market. We are the global market, right? So when you look at that, right, jobs leave, factories close, and the country keeps borrowing money, it starts to feel like we're giving away our power, which we were little by little. So selling off America is really a way of saying that during the Bush administration and the Clinton administration allowed too much of American money, jobs, and economic power to end up in other people's hands, like China. So when you look at it, right, a country can't stay strong if it stops building, stops producing, and starts depending on everybody else to survive, right? And that's what really frustrated me within the Bush and the Clinton administration, right? Because they thought, oh, we sell off our companies to other countries for cash flow, and they make it for us. Oh, we'll have money coming in. Well, how if we're not having? They're just taking our infrastructure they brought for one solid price and basically took all our jobs and just benefiting off of us and selling their cars here while we don't have no jobs for working people to be able to afford their cars and buy their cars as we once used to by making everything American made, which was better back then when I talked to, seniors and those back then. The cars were more metal, and now things are more cheaper and fragile and more like plastic, as seniors would say, speaking to senior mentors and older individuals who lived back in the time, because I like to learn, you know, and learn from their lessons because they have gone through that go through as seniors. And I'm a young person with an old soul. So I like to learn from mistakes of the past so to not repeat them today. This is why I take so much passion in doing these political commentary videos. But now get into this with the whole thing situation, and you're looking at this situation and Elon Chao, making reported appearances in China. Um, this gets into the August 3rd date, because this thing has been flying around all over social media. And I need to break it down straight for you. The claim going around is that if McConnell dies on or after August 3rd, Kentucky somehow can hold a special election in time. And that Senate seat just sits there empty until January when the new Congress gets sworn in. That's the rumor. That's what's been spreading like wildfire in the comment section and group chats. But here's what I got to slow down and give you the facts, because reporters who actually sat down and read Kentucky's House Bill 622 word for word, section by section, says there's no clause like that anywhere in that statute. None. The real deadline for a special election, based on how the law is actually written, would land around November 9th, not August 3rd. So somebody made that date up, or somebody misread something and it took off before anybody could correct it. Let me explain House Bill 622 in plain terms, because this part actually matters. Back in 2024, Kentucky passed this law, and what it did was take away the governor's power to just handpick somebody to fill a Senate vacancy. Before this, if a senator died or stepped down, the governor could basically appoint whoever he wanted, no vote, no say from the people. This law changed that. Now it requires an actual special election where the voters decide who fills that seat. And family, that's a good thing. That's accountability. That's power going back to the people, as it should, because they are public servants, instead of sitting in one man's hand. So here's my point, and I want you to really hear this one. Even though this August 3rd date is in the words of the reporter who checked it, utter legal nonsense that you heard in one of the clips I played, the fact that it spread as fast as it did tells you something real about where we're at right now. People don't trust what they're being told. And when a made up deadline can spread across the internet faster than the actual facts, that's not a people problem. That's a trust problem. Think about it like this. When officials go quiet, when the answer to every question is declined to comment or no updates at this time, people don't just sit around waiting patiently. They start filling in the blanks themselves. And that's on the institution, family, not on the public. And if you don't want people making things up, you tell them what's actually going on. Simple as that. And this isn't the first time we've seen this pattern either. This is the same reason folks got skeptical during that whole flag redesign situation, pushing something nobody asked for without explaining why. It's the same reason people raised their eyebrows over that financial disclosure dodge. When a public official gets asked a direct question about money and just talks around it instead of answering. Every time leaders, using my examples, go silent instead of just talking straight, people fill that silence with their own conclusions. And half the time, those conclusions turn out worse than the truth would have been. Now, zoom out for me for a second, family, because this was never really about whether one 84-year-old senator is sick or not. This is about something bigger, and this is about whether the people we elect owe us the truth about their health, about their family's dealings, about anything that affects whether they can actually do the job we put them in office to do. And this is exactly why so many people on the right and on the left are done with career politicians serving into their 80s with no real transparency about their condition. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, family. That frustration is bipartisan at this point. People are tired of watching leaders hold on to power for decades while dodging basic questions about whether they're even able to serve. Now, to be fair, I got to name the tension honestly. Health is private. People deserve dignity when they're sick. And I'm not out here saying a man should have had his medical charts posted for the world to see. That's not what I'm asking for. But when you hold public power, when your decisions affect millions of people, the country has a right to know if you can still do the job you were elected to do. Those two things can be true at the same time. So here's my verdict, plain and simple. As you guys can see in this article, you guys can go check it out. I'm not going to read it because I broke down basically what was going on and what was the concern with Elaine Chao, which is Mitch McConnell's wife, basically leaving 3 days after he was hospitalized. You guys can go check it out within Louisville, Kansas, news article here. But whether Mitch McConnell, here's my verdict. Whether McConnell is fine, whether he's recovering, or whether something worse than what we've been told, the silence is what's fueling the distrust, not the illness itself. The illness is just biology, family. That happens to all of us eventually. It's the silence and the timing of this Beijing trip that you see in this article here, sitting right at the top of it. That's got people questioning everything. Trust gets built through openness, family, not through silence. And silence every single time gets filled with the worst assumptions people can come up with. There's a scripture that fits this whole situation. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 22. And it says, the Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy. Whether you're spiritual or not, that's just wisdom for life. Honesty is what holds any relationship together, any family together, any nation together. So let me know what you think in the comments, family. Hit that like button, turn on your notifications, post notifications, subscribe, and spread that peace, love, and positivity, and let the love supersede the hate, family. I'll catch you in the next one. Let me know you guys' thoughts. As always, we're just having a conversation. Peace.